Okay, guys, time for the fun stuff. All right. So, in every language, there are something called conditionals. Conditionals allow you to make rules inside of your program. Uh, just give you an example. Now, in JavaScript, let's introduce you to the if statement, the if conditional statement. If, and by the way, this basically functions like this. You have if, and if something is true, then you will run something inside of these two brackets. Let me break that down a little bit more. Like I said, every language has something called an if. It has something that allows you to make a rule to say that if something is true, and we're going to put the conditional inside of these two parentheses right here. And for instance, this could mean if I just put true in here, it will always run because, for instance, this is always going to be seen as true because true is true, right? It's a truism. So if I put this here, make it easy. And you don't necessarily have to, like, if you notice, I actually put a tab right there, and that's a sort of, what do they call that? It's a, there's an actual term for it that I'm blanking on right now, but there's a format that every coding language has, and there's coding conventions. That's the word I'm looking for. You have syntax conventions that allow you to read your code a little bit easier, and one way to do that is everything inside of these brackets, you'll put a tab there. So it's formatted in a way that looks cleaner. Now again, if I put this right here, it's still going to run. It looks a little bit cleaner if I put a tab right there. So that's the reasoning for that. Although, as you'll see here pretty soon, that doesn't work in Python. I'll show you. We'll get in that later. But if I run this, because this is true, once again, this is always going to run. See that? So it went into here, and here I can, this is inside of conditional. Now, if I put this as false, what do you think is going to happen? Just going to skip over that entirely. It never actually gets into here because everything inside of these brackets would only run if this is true. And you can put anything in here. 1 plus 1 always equals 2. If I ran that, that would also work. We can get in more of why I put 2. We can talk about that later. There's a reason why I put 2 equal signs there. Now we're going to stick with the easy stuff. So once again, if true, always will run this. But I touched on something earlier. Every language has its own syntax, it's just the way they do things here, right? You walk into a new language and someone says, hey, do I put brackets in here? They're like, no, we don't use brackets here. In Python, we do some crazy stuff, and we say, well, first of all, we type correctly, but no brackets in Python. What we do here is a tab. You see that? Now, I mentioned that earlier. In JavaScript, a tab is just for looking pretty. In Python, it's how it works. So if I put if true right here, and then here, I'm going to put a bunch of tabs. Let's see what happens. I think that's just going to break it. Yeah, that breaks it. Oh! This is embarrassing. No, excuse me. In Python, true has to be capitalized for it to be the actual truth statement. Same with false. It would have to be capitalized in order for it to read, and you see it changes color when I do the right one. So let's see if that works. Okay, that does work. But if I do, yeah. See, because this is not indented, it basically says it's looking for something, but it can't find it. This is going to be really hard to wrap your head around in the beginning. But instead of brackets, it uses tab spacing to figure out what is inside of this if block here. You see, when I put that tab there, it worked. And if I did another one down here, but I've made this one if false. So you see that? So when I made a new line, they had a new if statement. It actually reads the end of this indentation as if it was an ending bracket. Super weird to wrap your head around in the beginning. If you're new to Python, it's definitely takes some time to get used to. Most other languages don't do that. You know, I've talked about how Ruby reads a lot like English, and it really does. So in Ruby, I can just use true with a lowercase t. No brackets, no colons. That's another thing. Inside of Python, I would have to put a colon there in order for that to work. But in Ruby, I have to put literally the word end. And that is basically the equivalent of an ending bracket, like in JavaScript. Now, doesn't matter. Tabs don't matter in this one. I can put it here, I can put it there. Really, as a normal convention in most coding languages, you put a tab inside of your conditional block right there. And we call these blocks, these sort of, in JavaScript it's easy to see a block because it's in between these two brackets. In Ruby, it's everything in between the if and the end. And or whatever other conditional statement there is, because there's more than just if. But as you can see, this ran. In PHP, it's pretty similar to JavaScript, except that you have to put this here in order for it to read as a PHP file. And then brackets. Although there is something here, this is going to break, not because of a tab, but of some other issue. We may have touched on this in the past. Unexpected ending bracket. The reason here is because there's no semicolon. If you don't have a semicolon, it's going to break in PHP. And a bunch of languages are like this. C++ is also like this as well. This language is based off of C, and that's why it broke. Boom, it works. So this is 90% of what you're doing when you're trying to learn a new language, and that is just to figure out how they do things here. Like, the basis of this whole course is to show you that all of these languages have extremely similar principles they follow, but the big thing is the flavor of each language, right? It's like the way that things are structured, the way that the way that people think in Python is a little bit different than the way that people think in JavaScript. Just how they order things, how they organize things is a little bit different. That is what you're trying to figure out when you're learning a new language. It's like, well, how do they say this in this language? It's the same as if you were to learn a new verbal communication language, right? Like, the concept of apple is the same in French and English, but obviously there's a different word for each. It's basically the same principle applies here. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one. We're going to get more into more conditional statements here soon in the next video. But now you can at least start to play around with some of the syntax. I know Python's a little bit weird, but like I said, it's one of the only, I think it's the only language that uses tabs like that. It's just something you have to wrap your head around. All right, guys.